garage door wasn't even halfway open when Zach heard the sirens. Then came her voice, shrill and cracking like glass against pavement, screaming that he was stealing the car she just bought yesterday. Zach barely had time to drop. The wrench before blue and red lights lit up the quiet cul-de-sac of Pine Hollow Circle. He'd been back at the house for less than 72 hours. He hadn't even unpacked his blender. Now, 3 squad cars boxed in his driveway, like he was some kind of fugitive. The officer in front, a wide-shouldered man with a practiced poker face, stepped out, hand on his holster. "Sir, put your hands where I can see them." Zach blinked, heart already pounding. "What? Why?" "Step away from the vehicle. Now." He took a step back from the garage, confusion fogging his brain. "That's my car." Karen's voice cut through the noise like a shriek in a cathedral. "That's my car. I bought it yesterday." She was across the street, arms flailing, phone still clutched in one hand, camera recording with the other. "I saw him breaking in," he hot-wired. You're just going to let him drive off in my car?" The car, his grandfather's 1968 cherry red Mustang Fastback, sat halfway out of the garage, glinting in the afternoon sun. The engine hadn't even been started yet. Zach opened his mouth to respond, but Officer Pokerface held up a hand. "Sir, we just need to verify ownership. You're not under arrest." "Great," Zach said dryly. "Then you can follow me inside, and I'll show you the title." Inside the cabin-style lake house, Zach rummaged through a manila folder pulled from a worn leather safe tucked behind a bookshelf. The house still smelled like cedar and motor oil. His grandfather had passed away just 6 months earlier, leaving the house and everything in it, including the car, to Zach. It had been his favorite place as a kid. They used to sit in that garage for hours while his grandfather tuned the engine, tuning him in as well. Life lessons passed between oil changes. He pulled out the title, 1968 Ford Mustang Fastback VN, ending in X22298A1. Owner, Harlan Grady Clay. Transfer to Zachary Thomas Clay. Notarized 2023. He handed it to the officer with steady hands, though his blood still boiled. The younger officer, Officer Lopez, his badge red, whistled low. "That's the cleanest, original title I've ever seen," Zach added. "There's more. I've got a photo of me and Grandpa with the car from when I was 11, and receipts for the rebuilt transmission." "Want me to grab those too?" The senior officer nodded slowly, giving a glance back out the window. Karen was still pacing on her lawn, like she expected them to drag him out in handcuffs. 15 minutes. Later, the officers were packing up. No charges filed, no vehicle impounded. Just a very stunned, red-faced Karen watching as they politely handed Zach his paperwork back. The senior officer turned to her. "Ma'am, the car's legally his. The title matches the VIN. There's no record of any transfer or sale on file." Karen sputtered. But, I saw it online. My friend saw it listed on an off-market site. I wired a deposit." Zach raised a brow. "So, you got scammed?" Her face twisted. "This is a setup. He listed it, then pulled it after he saw me. Who was interested? This is a hate crime, a coordinated fraud. You have to do something." Officer Lopez shook his head. "Ma'am, if you believe someone sold you a car fraudulently, you need to file a report with financial crimes. But this man didn't take anything. You were never on the title." Karen's mouth hung open like a broken garage hinge. "Have a good evening," the senior officer said, already heading back to his cruiser. Karen turned on her heel and stormed back across the street. Zach stood on his porch, arms crossed, and finally let himself exhale. He wasn't angry yet, but he would be. By sunset, the entire block had seen the commotion. Two neighbors waved cautiously. One, a young woman with a husky on a leash, whispered, "Karen strikes again," as she passed. Zach gave her a half-smile. He popped the garage back open and finally slid the Mustang all the way out into the driveway. The car gleamed, immaculate, despite the dust. He sat in the driver's seat for a long minute, hands on the wheel, remembering his grandfather's voice. "You take care of something long enough, son, and it becomes a part of you." Zach whispered, "I'm trying, Gramps." Across the street, Karen pulled out her phone again and began filming. "Community update," she said to the camera. "Pine Hollow residents should be aware. Individual with criminal history now occupying 44A. Approached officers aggressively. Claims ownership of vehicle that is clearly misrepresented. HOA board will convene immediately to address this threat to neighborhood safety." Zach didn't hear her, but the next morning he woke up to a notice taped to his front door. OA compliance warning. Unauthorized vehicle storage in driveway. Violent conduct allegation pending review. Zach stared at the page in disbelief. The garage wasn't even officially under the HOA's jurisdiction. His house was right at the border. He looked across the street. Karen was sipping coffee on her porch, legs crossed, clipboard on her lap. She smiled. Then she winked. Zach Clay stood barefoot on his front porch, staring at the compliance notice in his hand like it was written in a foreign language. He read it again. Unauthorized vehicle storage. Driveway exposure limit exceeded. HOA Section 12.4. Resident was involved in a disturbance involving law enforcement. Pending HOA safety review. He blinked. Driveway exposure limit? The car in question, the same 1968 Mustang Karen had accused him of stealing, sat parked neatly, not even touching the sidewalk. The tires were chalked. The license plate clearly visible. This wasn't about rules. It was about retaliation. Zach walked back inside and poured himself a cup of cold coffee. He had barely unpacked his boxes, yet he was already knee-deep in HOA drama. He had hoped moving into his grandfather's lake house would be a reset, space, solitude, and maybe even a little peace. Instead, Karen Whitmore had declared war. The 911 call she made still echoed in his head, not because she thought he'd stolen the car, but because she genuinely believed she could convince the world it was hers. That unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. Later that afternoon, Zach drove into town to visit the DMV. He wanted something official, something indisputable. He waited 30 minutes at the counter before a woman in her 50s took his paperwork and ran the van. She squinted at her screen. "This car hasn't been sold in over 10 years. Zach nodded. "That checks out. My grandfather gave it to me. He passed last year. No recent listings, no auction history, no registration activity beyond your transfer in March. Can you flag it? For what?" He thought for a second. "Just in case someone tries to register it under a fake sale." She tilted her head, but nodded. "I can make a note. You'd be surprised how often scams pop up. People selling cars that aren't even theirs to start with." Zach nodded slowly. That's when it clicked. Karen didn't try to steal the car by force. She tried to claim it because she believed she had already bought it. He returned home to find another letter shoved halfway into his mailbox. Unsigned. "You're ruining the neighborhood already. That car isn't legal. She has the receipt. Just leave." Zach folded the note and dropped it into a folder labeled Evidence Karen. He'd started it that morning. Inside were the HOA violation, a printout of Karen's ranting social post, a transcript of her 911 call, which a friend from the police station forwarded, a screenshot from a neighbor's Ring camera showing Karen circling his garage at night. Days before the incident, he was building a case. He didn't know yet what for, but the need to protect himself was becoming impossible to ignore. The next day, a knock came just as Zach was tightening the hood latch on the Mustang. It wasn't Karen. It was someone younger, maybe in her 20s. She wore a hoodie, earbuds tangled in her fingers, and a nervous look. "Hi," she said, glancing behind her. "I live 2 doors down. I'm Sophie." Zach straightened. "Hey." I saw what happened. With the cops and Karen. He waited. I think she was scammed." Zach blinked. "What?" "She told my mom at the book club last week that she'd found her dream car online. Said it matched the one she'd seen across the street in your garage. She even showed a screenshot of a listing. The photo had your address number cropped out, but I recognized the siding." Zach's jaw tightened. "She bought my car online?" "She thinks she did. Said some guy named Tony accepted her deposit through a Cash App and was gonna meet her at the title office. She never met him. Then she saw you open the garage and assumed you were the scammer." Zach ran a hand down his face. "Unbelievable." She made a mistake, but instead of admitting it, she decided to double down and throw you under the bus. Sophie held out a USB stick. "This is footage from my outdoor camera. You can see her walking up your driveway around midnight 2 nights before she called the cops." Zach took it gently. "Thank you. I just thought you should know." She walked away before he could say anything else. That night, Zach opened the footage on his laptop. Sure enough, the grainy black-and-white video clearly showed Karen sneaking up his driveway. Hoodie pulled, tight, flashlight in hand. She walked slowly, peering into the Mustang's windows, then took a picture with her phone, time-stamped, dated, undeniable. She'd been casing his garage before she ever made the 911 call. The next day, Zach received an email from the HOA board. Subject: Mandatory Compliance Hearing. Friday at 6 p.m. Due to recent community disturbance and non-compliance with vehicle storage regulations, you are required to appear at the HOA clubhouse for a formal hearing to determine disciplinary action. Failure to appear may result in community fines and further enforcement procedures. Zach stared at the screen, jaw clenched. Karen had taken her paranoia and turned it into a full-blown campaign, but she'd made one mistake too many. That evening, Zach called the county recorder's office, then a friend at the sheriff's department, then another old buddy from his mechanic days who specialized in VIN fraud. By the end of the night, he had all the pieces. Karen hadn't just accused him of theft. She had fabricated a lie based on a photo she shouldn't have had access to, and called 911 to back it up. But the VIN didn't lie, and neither did the time-stamped security footage. Now, it wasn't just a feud. It was a case. Zach Clay sat on the porch swing, arms crossed, laptop on the patio table beside him, watching Karen pace her perfectly trimmed lawn like a warden guarding her compound. A breeze rustled the pine trees overhead, and for a moment, the lake beyond shimmered with peace. But peace was a myth in Pine Hollow Circle, especially when your neighbor was waging a war against reality. Zach had done nothing wrong, legally, morally, or otherwise. He had simply opened his garage, started working on a car that belonged to him, and ended up being detained in front of the entire neighborhood because someone with a clipboard and an agenda said he wasn't supposed to. Now, less than a week later, he'd been labeled a criminal, and not just by Karen. The next morning, his trash wasn't picked up. The bin sat untouched while the rest of the block's waste vanished before 9 a.m. He checked the lid. No overflow. No improper sorting. Then he noticed the sticky note slapped on top. Improper container placement. HOA code 5.3. Fines pending. He hadn't even received a warning. That same day, someone dumped a bag of leaves across his driveway. His mailbox was leaning like it had been hit by a knee, or a hammer. And a new post showed up on the neighborhood bulletin board titled, Red Mustang Alert, Unregistered Vehicle, Kanitoy, Chutisers Stolen Property Concern. Posted anonymously, of course, but written in that unmistakably sharp, over-punctuated tone Karen favored. Residents, please be aware of a red vehicle present at 44A. This vehicle is believed to be connected to an ongoing theft investigation. Do not approach. Contact HOA security or authorities if suspicious behavior is observed. There was no HOA security. There was no ongoing theft investigation. But facts never stopped Karen before. At the local cafe the next afternoon, Zach heard whispers before he even got his coffee. Isn't that him? The guy with the stolen car? I heard the board is holding a disciplinary hearing. Zach clenched his jaw but didn't respond. He wasn't here to make friends. He just wanted his coffee, a quiet morning, and a legal path forward. But it stung more than he expected. He'd grown up visiting this neighborhood. His grandfather used to host barbecues. Neighbors used to wave. Now he felt like a fox in a henhouse. Back at home, the HOA's disciplinary hearing was still scheduled for Friday. No agenda, no transparency, just a thinly veiled threat. Zach wasn't worried about the HOA's fake authority. His property sat right on the line of their jurisdiction, close enough to harass, not close enough to control. His grandfather had fought to keep the house off their books, but if they were pushing this hard, it meant Karen wasn't just trying to punish him. She was trying to cover her tracks. That night, Sophie came by again, this time with a laptop. You need to see this, she said, pulling up a private neighborhood Facebook group. Pine Hollow Proud, residents only. Zach hadn't joined. He hadn't even known it existed. But Sophie's mom was a member. Sophie scrolled to a thread from 3 days earlier. Karen had posted a 500-word essay titled, What Happens When the Law Protects the Guilty? In it, she described, without naming names, a mysterious new resident who had stolen a community vehicle, threatened her position as HOA president, and intimidated local families with aggressive garage behavior. Zach actually laughed at that last part. Garage behavior? Sophie didn't laugh. She posted it the same night she called the cops, she said. The same night she told my mom she had a copy of the sale receipt for the car. Zach blinked. She said that? Yeah. She told everyone she had proof the car was hers. Where's the proof? Sophie shrugged. She hasn't shown it. Probably because it doesn't exist. Zach leaned back in his chair. Or because it's fake. The next day, Zach visited Donnie, an old friend from his mechanic days who now ran a body shop 2 towns over. Donnie was the kind of guy who could sniff out title fraud before the engine even cooled. Zach handed him the title, the VIN, and Sophie's flash drive with Karen's late-night footage. Donnie didn't even blink. You've got everything you need to take her down. You think? Donnie nodded. If she used a photo of your car to commit a fake sale, or worse, claimed ownership based on a scam, that's criminal misrepresentation. I don't think she bought the car, Zach said. I think she wired money to a scammer, then Saw my car and convinced herself I was the one who took it. Donnie grinned. Then she's not just wrong, she's reckless. Zach returned home that evening to find a new notice taped to his door. Final warning. Disciplinary hearing reminder. Attendance mandatory. Residents who fail to comply with safety reviews will be subjected to HOA-imposed penalties, including but not limited to fines, restriction of services, and recommendation for removal. Karen Whitmore, HOA president. Zach crumpled the paper, walked calmly back inside, and printed his reply. To the HOA board. Please be advised that my property lies outside of HOA jurisdiction per Plat Map 3B, approved and recorded 2006. Your recent notices have no legal authority. However, I will attend your hearing as a courtesy. I suggest you prepare documentation of your claims. I'll be bringing mine. Zach Clay. That Friday evening, Zach ironed a button-up shirt and walked into the community clubhouse. The room went quiet. Karen stood at the front of the room with her usual binder and a smug grin. Several board members sat beside her, all with printed copies of something. Zach walked up to the podium and opened his own folder. Inside, the original vehicle title, transfer record from the DMV insurance policy photo of Karen snooping around his garage, a notarized statement from Sophie, and a VIN verification report from Donnie's shop. He dropped the final piece on the table. A large, high-resolution photo, taken from the scam listing Karen claimed to have purchased from. The car, the driveway, the siding, his house. Karen's eyes widened. I'd like to know, Zach said, voice calm, how someone buys a car off the internet with no title, no keys, and no confirmation, based on a photo that was taken from my garage. Camera. The room was silent. Karen stood frozen, jaw clenched, pearl earrings trembling. She had come to shame him, but she'd walked into her own hearing. Karen Whitmore's smile cracked like thin ice under a heavy boot. She stood behind the folding table at the front of the Pine Hollow clubhouse, flanked by her clipboard army, the HOA board she had cherry-picked over years of monthly meetings and manicured manipulation. She had walked into this disciplinary hearing expecting cheers, nods, and validation. Instead, she was staring at a VIN verification report, a notarized title, a photo of herself trespassing, and a blown-up image of a Craigslist-style car listing, with the background unmistakably matching Zach Clay's garage siding. The room had gone dead quiet. No one shuffled their papers. No one cleared their throat. Only Karen's pearls made a sound, clicking lightly as she reached for a glass of water she no longer seemed sure she deserved. Zach didn't move. He didn't gloat. He didn't need to, because facts don't flinch. Let me be perfectly clear, Zach said, voice even. The car was never listed for sale. Not by me, not by my grandfather, not on Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, or anywhere else. This scam? Someone ran it using a photo taken of my property, most likely from across the street. His eyes flicked briefly toward Karen. She claimed, on a public HOA forum, that I was harboring stolen property. She called 911 and falsely reported a theft in progress. She circulated rumors that I was under criminal investigation. Zach took a breath. I have never broken a single community rule. And more importantly, my property lies outside of HOA jurisdiction, per recorded plat maps. He placed a single page, printout, highlighted in yellow, on the table. It showed the property boundary line slicing neatly around 44A. In short, he said, this entire hearing is unlawful. A murmur broke out in the crowd. Mr. Levinson, the elderly man from 3 doors down, leaned forward in his seat. "He's not even in the HOA?" Karen's voice came, finally, tight and high. "That boundary map is outdated." "It's from the county recorder's office. Stamped last year," Zach replied. "Want to call and verify?" Karen ignored the question. "Then why did your grandfather attend HOA meetings? Why did he pay voluntary dues?" Zach nodded. "Voluntary? Out of goodwill. He did it to keep peace, not because he was obligated." More murmurs, a few heads nodding. "I didn't come here to cause trouble," Zach continued. "I came here to fix up my grandfather's house, take care of his car, and live a quiet life. But from day one, I've been harassed, slandered, and accused." He leaned forward. "And now, I've been forced to defend myself against fiction." Karen slammed her hand on the table. "This is absurd. I paid for that car. I have the receipt." Zach arched an eyebrow. "Let's see it." She paused, realizing the trap. "I don't have it with me." "Then I suggest you go find the scammer who conned you," Zach said, voice like a closing steel door. "Because I'm not him." Board member Shelley Duvall, a retired attorney and usually Karen's staunchest supporter, adjusted her glasses and cleared her throat. "Karen, if what he's saying is true, it's all manipulated," Karen snapped. "He staged all of this." Zach smiled for the first time. "So I staged the county plat map, my grandfather's notarized title, and the Vine database." Karen's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. Shelley leaned toward the others. "He has notarized documentation. If we proceed with any sanctions, we expose ourselves and the HOA to liability." Someone in the crowd clapped. A single, sharp sound. Then another joined in, and another. Karen looked around, wild-eyed, as the room shifted. The neighbors who once blindly nodded at her speeches were now whispering, frowning, second-guessing. The Tito legend of Karen, the unshakable, unstoppable queen of Pine Hollow, was beginning to crack. She pointed a trembling finger at Zach. "You think this is over? You have no idea who you're messing with." Zach didn't respond. He simply packed his folder, tucked it under his arm, and said, "I'm done here." As he passed the table, he paused just long enough for Karen to hear. "You're not, though, only one who can file complaints." Then he walked out. That night, Zach sat on his back porch with a cup of tea and the faint sound of frogs near the lake. Sophie had texted him 2 words. "You won." He wasn't sure what winning meant just yet. He wasn't sure it was over, but it was the first time he'd felt calm since the day he rolled up that garage door. The next morning, a sheriff's cruiser pulled up. For a moment, Zach's heart sank. Again. But the deputy stepped out calmly and approached with a friendly nod. "Mr. Clay?" Zach stood. "Yeah? I'm here about the 911 call from earlier this month. We've reviewed the footage and reports. We're forwarding a summary to the DA's office for consideration." "Consideration for what?" The deputy looked back at his cruiser. "Filing a false police report. It's not guaranteed to go anywhere, but we're taking it seriously, especially after the neighbor complaints we've started receiving." Zach blinked. "Complaints?" "Fipo the," officer nodded. "Turns out, you're not the first neighbor Karen's tried to correct, but you might be the first one to push back." Zach exhaled. "Thanks for letting me know." 2 days later, Karen was served with a cease and desist letter. Slander, harassment, trespassing. It was formal. It was real. And it came with a clause Zach had carefully inserted. Any future attempt to enforce HOA rulings against 44A will be treated as unlawful harassment and referred to legal counsel. For the first time, the clipboard didn't hold the power. It was just paper. And Karen? She was just noise. Karen Whitmore did not back down quietly. Though the disciplinary hearing had unraveled in front of her, though neighbors now crossed the street to avoid eye contact, and whispers followed her into the grocery store, she responded the only way. She knew how. She doubled down. By Tuesday, flyers began appearing in mailboxes across Pine Hollow Circle, cheaply printed, cut unevenly, and written in bold red letters. They read, "Warning. Red Mustang criminal still loose on Pine Hollow. If you care about this community, demand removal of dangerous elements from our neighborhood. HOA bylaws are in place for a reason. Protect our children. Demand accountability. Don't be silent. No signature." But nobody needed one. Even her font gave her away. Zach found the flyer tucked under his windshield wiper. He didn't even blink. He just peeled it off, folded it neatly, and added it to the growing folder labeled Karen, Documented Harassment. Inside now were her trespassing photo, her 911 transcript, the scam listing photo from his garage, video from Sophie's security cam, the cease and desist he served her. And now, the flyer, he wasn't collecting out of paranoia anymore. He was building a wall of truth, because people like Karen didn't stop when they lost. They stopped when they were cornered. That afternoon, Zach visited the county assessor's office. It was quiet, the kind of bureaucratic stillness that hummed with fluorescent lights and filing cabinets. He gave his name and the address, and the clerk pulled up the parcel information for 44A Pine Hollow Circle. He asked for a printed plat map, 2 copies, signed, and then, on a whim, he asked something else. "Could you show me the zoning boundary for the HOA?" The clerk pulled it up on her screen. "You're just outside it." "Anyone ever try to redraw that line?" She looked up. "Actually, yeah. There was a request filed 2 years ago." "By whom?" She turned her screen slightly. The name was there in black and white. Karen Whitmore, HOA president. Zach didn't know what stunned him more, that she had tried to secretly extend HOA jurisdiction over his grandfather's home, or that she had done it 2 years before he even moved in. She'd been after the house since before she ever knew who owned it. It wasn't personal. It was about control. Karen had seen a non-HOA property at the edge of her kingdom, and she wanted it under her thumb. The red Mustang had just become the symbol of her failure. Now, Zach understood. This was never about the car. It was about the territory. That night, Sophie knocked again. She wasn't alone this time. She brought her mom, Linda, who wore a cautious expression and clutched a folder. "Hi, Zach," she said softly. "I'm sorry it took me this long, but I think it's time people start speaking up." Zach let them in. They sat at the kitchen island, flipping through the folder. Inside were screenshots of Karen's private messages, pressuring neighbors to vote out those who disagreed with her. A letter from 2 years ago demanding Linda remove her bird feeder because the HOA does not allow wildlife enticement. Notes from a neighbor who was fined $150 for painting her door navy blue instead of approved beige. "She's bullied this street for a decade," Linda said. "But no one ever pushed back until you," Sophie nodded. "You exposed her to sunlight." Zach frowned. "I didn't mean to. I just wanted to live in peace." Linda gave him a sad smile. "People like Karen don't know how to leave people alone. They think peace means obedience." Next day, Zach filed a formal complaint with the county housing authority. Then he emailed the HOA's overseeing legal auditor, attaching every piece of documentation he had collected. Finally, he sent a letter, certified, to Karen Whitmore's address. It read, "Dear Ms. Whitmore, effective immediately. Any further communication from you will be regarded as harassment and referred directly to legal counsel. You are hereby instructed to cease all public or private efforts to defame, slander, or otherwise interfere with my property, privacy, or reputation. This includes, though is not limited to, flyers, social media posts, direct communications, or manipulation of HOA meetings in reference to my name or address. Continued violations will result in a civil suit and a restraining order. This is not a negotiation. It's a boundary. Zachary T. Clay." He sealed it. He sent it. He didn't wait for a reply. By Friday, something incredible happened. Neighbors began talking again. The man next door brought over a box of donuts, said he loved Mustangs, said he'd been meaning to say something at the hearing but got nervous. Sophie helped Zach plant a few wildflowers in the front garden. Even Mrs. Epstein, the strict woman from the end of the street, walked by, gave a curt nod and said, "About time someone stood up to that tyrant." Zach smiled. The fog was lifting. Pine Hollow Circle was no longer Karen's. It was becoming a neighborhood again. Karen, for her part, went silent. No flyers, no meetings, no porch pacing. Her blinds stayed closed. Her front porch sat cold. And yet, Zach knew better than to assume it was over. Silence didn't mean surrender, not with someone like her. But now, he wasn't alone. Now, the community was watching too. The storm arrived on a Monday morning, not with thunder, but with a letter. A pale yellow envelope, certified and stamped with the seal of the State Community Affairs Department. Zach Clay slit it open carefully, expecting a reply to the formal complaint he'd submitted against the Pine Hollow HOA. But this was more than a reply. It was confirmation that his complaint had triggered something deeper, an investigation. Karen Whitmore, self-declared Queen of Compliance, was about to be audited. According to the letter, a third-party auditor had been appointed to assess the HOA's records, financials, disciplinary rulings, election history, and any reported abuse of power. Separate review would examine board composition and voting practices. Zach leaned back in his chair, rereading the final line. Given the number and nature of complaints filed over the last 24 months, this audit is considered high priority. Zach didn't smile, but he did whisper, "Finally." The community buzzed within hours. People checked their mailboxes, whispered in their driveways, gathered in hushed pairs near the clubhouse. By that evening, the bulletin board in front of the HOA office had been vandalized, with tape, not spray paint. Someone had covered Karen's laminated mission statement with a single piece of paper that said, "Now audit that." Karen's porch remained dark. 3 days later, the auditors arrived. 2 men in slacks and sport coats, armed with clipboards, questions, and an entire legal pad of forms. They entered the HOA office and requested access to all digital and printed records from the past 5 years. Karen wasn't present. Shelley Duvall, the board member who had started distancing herself after the disciplinary hearing, handed over the keys. "We'll need access to email accounts," the taller auditor said, "especially any sent to or from residents involving fines, violations, or complaint handling." Shelley looked uneasy. "Should I call Karen?" The auditor barely looked up. "That won't be necessary." Meanwhile, Zach kept his distance. He didn't need to hover. The machine was in motion now. His job had been to pull the lever. He spent his afternoons working on the Mustang again. fixing the radio, installing new seat covers, polishing the chrome until it gleamed like a mirror under the sun. It was the first time he touched the car without thinking of flashing blue lights or Karen's shrill accusations. It was his again. Fully. Finally. On Friday, the first bombshell dropped. The auditors discovered that Karen had used HOA funds, over $2,000, to pay for printed flyers, mailers, and even a lawn service that only trimmed her yard. No vote had been held. No reimbursement request had been filed. When asked about it via email, Karen replied, "I am the president. My discretion is permitted under emergency maintenance." The auditors disagreed. The rest of the board was stunned. A vote of interim suspension was passed in Karen's absence. Quietly, unanimously. For the first time in 10 years, Karen Whitmore was no longer the acting HOA president. By Saturday morning, Linda and Sophie knocked again. They brought Zach a peach cobbler and a handwritten card. "Thank you for standing up. You reminded this neighborhood that silence isn't safety." That afternoon, 3 more neighbors dropped by. One brought fresh eggs. Another asked Zach to help jump his mower. The last, a teenager who lived down the street, just said, "Nice car," and smiled before walking away. The street felt different now. Softer, warmer, free. Karen didn't take the news well. Sunday morning, she stood in her driveway wearing a silk robe, yelling at Shelley Duvall loud enough for the entire block to hear. "I built this community. You'd all still be painting your houses blue if it weren't for me." Shelley didn't flinch. She only said, "This isn't about paint, Karen. It's about people. And you forgot that part a long time ago." Karen's husband appeared moments later, gently guiding her inside. The door slammed. For the next 3 days, her blinds never opened. On the day the auditors left, they posted a summary notice on the clubhouse bulletin board. It read, "Audit complete. Findings to be reviewed by County Housing Oversight Committee. Key issues identified: improper fund usage, selective enforcement of bylaws, failure to hold, timely elections, and targeted harassment of non-HOA properties. Board leadership transition recommended. Further consequences pending." Below that, someone had pinned a handwritten note. Turns out, the real violation was power. That evening, Zach walked down to the lake's edge. The sun had just dipped behind the trees, and the sky was smeared with lavender and gold. Crickets chirped. The breeze was kind. He breathed deep. The Mustang's hood gleamed in the fading light behind him. No more flyers, no more threats, no more HOA knock-knocks at his door. Karen had tried to build her power on fear, but Zach had built his case on truth. And in the end, truth doesn't need to yell. It just needs to be heard. The lake glittered under the morning sun, calm and forgiving, like it didn't remember the chaos that had unfolded just yards from its shoreline. But Zach Clay remembered everything. Every knock, every threat, every false accusation burned into the marrow of his experience here. Today, though, it finally felt like he could let it go. He stood in his driveway, arms crossed, as a black SUV pulled up to the curb. The passenger door opened. Out stepped a sharply dressed woman with a badge clipped to her lapel. County Housing Oversight Committee. She approached with the kind of no-nonsense gait Zach had come to respect. Efficient, confident, and quiet in power. "You're Mr. Clay?" she asked. "I am." She handed him a document. Final notice of leadership dismissal. Pine Hollow HOA. Due to verified misuse of funds, false reporting, and documented patterns of harassment, Karen Whitmore is permanently removed from her role as HOA president. Furthermore, she is prohibited from seeking future office in any residential board or committee governed by the County Housing Oversight Authority. A community-wide re-election is scheduled for next month. External observers will oversee the process. Zach looked up. "It's official then," she nodded. "Very," he exhaled. Not because it was over, but because it finally felt real. By noon, word had spread. The flyer Karen had taped to every stop sign 2 weeks ago was being quietly pulled down by the same neighbors who once believed her stories. Some offered quiet nods when they passed Zach. Some brought pie, and one elderly man with a cane, who hadn't spoken a word to Zach since the garage incident, simply whispered, "We needed this." Zach nodded, accepting the silent olive branch. Peace, when earned, doesn't always come loud. Karen's house, once the shining beacon of control and conformity, now stood quiet. Her lawn had grown uneven. Her blinds stayed closed. The clipboard was gone. Some said she'd left town for a wellness retreat. Others said she was preparing to sue the HOA. Zach didn't care. The war was over. The battlefield was empty, and the Mustang, his grandfather's pride and joy, was finally free to hum in the driveway without sparking chaos. 1 week later, the Pine Hollow HOA held its first open forum candidate meeting in over a decade. Zach attended, not to run, but to listen. A retired teacher, a young couple with a toddler, and even Shelley Duvall all stood and pitched visions of transparency, neighborliness, and sanity. The crowd clapped. Some cheered. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for the first time, the community chose without fear. Back at home, Zach stood in his garage, gazing at the Mustang. Its cherry-red body glowed under new LED lights. The hood gleamed. The new seat covers were snug and pristine. A photo of his grandfather, framed in wood, now hung on the back wall. This place had gone from battlefield to tribute, and it was time to take the final step. He grabbed the key, slid it into the ignition, and turned it. The engine roared to life, smooth and proud. As he pulled out of the driveway, a few neighbors waved. Linda stood on her porch with Sophie, both raising glasses of lemonade. Even Mrs. Epstein gave a grudging thumbs up from across the street. The Mustang purred as it rolled, past the lake, past the signs Karen once ordered, past the cracked sidewalk where she'd once screamed into her phone, demanding 911. "Send someone now before he escapes." Zach grinned. If only they could see it now. He didn't drive far. Just down the shoreline, past the trees, toward a small overlook his grandfather used to take him to as a boy. He parked, stepped out, let the wind hit his face. He pulled the old letter from his pocket, his grandfather's last handwritten note, folded so many times it was soft at the edges. "Zach, this home isn't perfect. This street isn't perfect. But it's ours. Protect it. Keep it honest. And for the love of all things, keep that car out of the HOA's hands." Gramp Zach chuckled. He had kept that promise. Every word of it. And somehow, in doing so, he had given the neighborhood a second chance, too. On his way home, he passed Karen's house. No sign of her, but something had changed. The porch light was on, and a small "for sale" sign now leaned against the front railing, tilted by wind but unmistakable. She was leaving. The final piece in place. Zach didn't stop. He didn't gloat. He just kept driving. Because peace isn't always about getting the last word. Sometimes it's just about finally being able to open your garage and know nobody's coming to take it away.